problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds.
Welcome to Sarah's Country, where we can plant seeds today to sit in the shade into the future. We can raise the sails collectively to weather the storms together, where we can celebrate the wins along with the challenges. It's my honour to bring you the matters that matter most to farming and growing food and fibre here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Sarah Perry. I'm the eternal optimist, craving for fairness whilst not ignorant to reality. This show is about people, planet and profit because each collectively, in my mind, needs each other to thrive in unison. In our primary sector, there is one phrase I hate. It's called, "we need to." It's like this empty plea for help from a silent hero to make our problems just disappear. What I love about selecting guests into Sarah's Country is they bring practical solutions where they have just got on with it, or the reality of the news that we just need to get on with as well. It is the Kiwi way. You know, I was raised on a diet as well of she'll be right, head down, ass up. It was the diet of a generation, though, of surfing on capital gains, blinded to environmental impacts, and a stiff upper lip. How far have we come? The times have deeply changed. Our language on everything from why we farm to how we look after our whānau and ourselves has certainly changed. I'd say our diets have got a hell of a lot healthier towards both human and Mother Nature. We have a great giveaway from one of our guests on the show coming up, which I'll draw in the comments after the show who has the best suggestion. After 7:30, Harriet Bremner is going to join us to share about how she's cutting down the staunch forest of rural New Zealand to let some light into our next generation's ability to cope with the challenges ahead. We have her book, Use Your Voice, to give away. This book, when Harriet shared with me her idea a year ago, I could immediately vision the imagery. The story actually involves my sister Ellie's black hunterweed Jess, who was the Will to Live mascot, who won't come out of her kennel because she's sad. She's lost her bark. You know, the colour just drains out through the centre of the book. And as Jess, feels like she's in a cage and she's trapped until her mate Pops, the sausage dog, comes along to let Jess out onto the hills to remind her, what she loves about life, and ultimately she finds her bark again. It's a truly special book and a great way to reach our children with this message of using your voice while they are so young and moldable. It's about the next generation's level of resilience because that's genetic gain, isn't it? Right, how do you get your hands on this free copy of the book? Joel, do you have a picture I've just sent you through that you might be able to put up on I'll send it through to you and it's up on Slack. How do you get your hands on a free copy of this book? While Joel pulls it up, we are going to share the comments out throughout tonight's live show. What is the one thing you do with your friends and family to take time for your mental health? Because sometimes you don't want to use your voice, you just want to get out and get some fresh air, some social connection. How do you help your family refill their cup? In the comments, wherever you're watching live, please give us some comments on how you go about that. It might just be simply as saying, walking in the hills, going for a bike ride, catching up with family and friends. And, I want some good creative ones because I'll draw after the show from the comments below across all the social media platforms that we broadcast onto a winner of Use Your Voice. Joel, did you find that picture? Also putting it up there. Look at this cover here. There's Jess, the black hunter on the left,
I know,
and her friend Pops. So Use Your Voice. We'll be talking to Harriet later in the show. Joel, random, I know you're very flat out there, but what do you do for yourself to go and chill out? I know you like going and stalking birds. I shouldn't say it like that all the time.
Yeah, stalking birds just makes it sound weird and a bit skeevy. I don't know.
This is of the winged type.
Yeah, the feathery kind. Yeah. No, I've recently started trying to learn how to roller skate.
Really?
Which has been fun. Yeah.
I find it interesting. Your partner, Sarah, she is a very active young lady and she has a lot of hobbies. We were talking about it, how sometimes, people are really into team sports and doing hobbies and other people just like to recluse and do their own thing to themselves,
Yeah.
And there is no right or wrong way, really.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, I enjoy going off into the woods by myself or up into the hills and all that. I think that's good fun. But it's nice to have a team sport every now and again.
Yeah, exactly. Especially roller derby. That gives a good way of getting your anger out.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah, like rugby. Now, COVID-friendly tips would be great as well. And we've got to remember our friends in Auckland today have found out that they will continue in level 3 through to Sunday night. And, of course, will be having a big impact on their mental health. I need to tell you just very quickly on that, when I lived in Auckland, I remember saying to my mum, I've never been surrounded by so many people in my life and felt as lonely. I tell you what, but you can go on the hills and be by yourself and you'll never ever feel lonely. There was a young guy that was crying at the bottom of the stairs outside my apartment, and I asked him, are you okay? Do you want to come have a beer? And he just said he's basically lonely. He's got no friends, and I couldn't get my head around how you could be lonely in such a massive amount of people. So there's just a lot of thoughts to people at the moment. Turning now to the stories that we have to share with you tonight. After 7:20, something to smile about for rural landowners. Property sales are pumping along, and sale volumes in the first 3-month period ending July 2020 have increased strongly from last month to be comfortably ahead of the equivalent period 12 months ago. Median prices remain unchanged as well. Conrad Wilkshire, General Manager for Rural for Property Brokers, is going to join us to share more. As I said, Harriet Bremner, children's author, is going to join us after 7:20 and discuss how Use Your Voice is being received in schools across New Zealand. Then to close the show, he is saying dairy debt levels aren't dismal. Dairy farmers are getting good yields on their investment now with the huge amount of debt repaid. And I want to know, is the negative OCR on the cards, and what does that look like for the rural sector? NZAB's Andrew Lamming is going to join us to close the show closer to 7:40. But first up on the show, we work through what is in the new National Environmental Standards for Freshwater Management and the RMA reform, all collectively coming at us in detail from Beef and Lamb New Zealand's Environment Strategy Manager, Corina Jordan, up next on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country.
Every morning, Kiwi farmers wake up to produce high quality food. Yet, every night, some Kiwi families are going to sleep hungry. Meet the Need is a charity founded by farmers, and it's here to change all that. We're about New Zealand farmers feeding New Zealand families by donating a small part of what we grow when we can. You can help us make sure no one in New Zealand goes to sleep hungry again. Visit meettheneed.org and follow us on social.
Whenever you're ready.
Well, southern farmers are angered at the requirement to re-sow winter crop paddocks by November 1, a month later than the rest of New Zealand, and the extent of pugging permitted on paddocks regardless of an adverse weather event and limits on winter... Sorry, I'm just going to do this again. So this wasn't quite right. Yeah, cool. Well, southern farmers are angered at the requirement to re-sow winter crop paddocks by the 1st of November, a month later than the rest of New Zealand. Now, the extent of pugging permitted on paddocks is regardless of any adverse weather events, and limits on winter grazing paddocks with a mean slope exceeding 10 degrees has been devised from a map from a desktop in Wellington. These provisions are included in the suite of essential freshwater measures regulations released in May, becoming enforceable as early as next week, requiring a consent. On the front page of Farmers Weekly this week, Neil Wallace discusses how regional councils are describing the new national environment standards for freshwater management in some places as unworkable. Joining us now to discuss is Beef and Lamb New Zealand Environment Strategy Manager, Corina Jordan, who presented the intricacies of the rules to a webinar earlier today. Please note this interview was pre-recorded earlier today, so I'm sorry I can't take your questions to Corina, but of course, as you know, the good people at Beef and Lamb will be able to answer your questions. Corina, welcome to Sarah's Country. Can you first please set the scene to explain how the various changes are coming into effect collectively and the impact that landowners need to be aware of?
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. So this is a comprehensive suite of proposals, and farmers have been engaged in this conversation, I suppose, over the last couple of years, and they've just landed essentially in all their detail over the last month or so. So what these proposed changes include is new stock exclusion regulations, changes to a national environmental standard for land use impacts, which is what farmers are really turning their minds to now, and changes to a national policy statement, which will be implemented by regional councils.
So now, in terms of the webinar, it's very hot. There's a lot of frequently asked questions that are coming through to our previous guests we've had on the show, everybody trying to wrap their head around it. But I think the biggest thing is this freshwater farm plan and then being certified. There has been certain parts of the country where these have come into effect. How are farmers going to source information, and what will they need to include?
Yeah, there's a lot of proposals on the National Environmental Standard. It's uncertain about how some of them are going to land, and I think that's what farmers are really grappling with, and I understand regional councils are struggling with as well. And one of those requirements is for farmers to have a certified freshwater farm plan, and as we know, there is no such thing as a certified freshwater farm plan at this stage. So we're yet to see what regional councils do and what the government does in relation to creating these certified freshwater farm plans.
What about in some areas where there is existing farm plans? Is this over and above?
Yeah, so again, there's confusion about what is required here. So these are the rules that we're talking about are winter forage cropping or grazing of animals on a winter forage crop and stock holding areas, and they require a certified freshwater farm plan. Some regions, Southland, Canterbury, Waikato, to name a few, and Hawke's Bay already have a requirement for farmers to have a farm plan, but there's a lack of clarity about whether that is the same thing or whether something on top of what some regional councils already have in place will be required.
One thing that has been extensively discussed is this 10-metre slope. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, so one of the issues with the National Environmental Standard that we're trying to get our head around is that they've used a map to determine if you're in or out of the stock exclusion requirements. And that map was based on less than 10 degrees slope, but it's inaccurate at the farm or the paddock scale. So it captures a whole lot of land that is greater than 10 degrees slope. It's a very, very blunt instrument. It's also hard to determine what is a waterway that meets these regulations as well and how that will be applied. So this is going to be a challenging spot, I think, for farmers and in particular for the regional council that has to land this.
And this is all to exclude stock out of waterways, but that has really changed too, because what deems a waterway now?
That's right. It's been a moving conversation over a period of time. So these are rivers that are 1 metre or wider, but it's unclear about where that 1 metre is going to be determined from. It could be a waterway that's 1 metre anywhere on the property or anywhere in the land parcel, or regional councils might take a more bespoke approach in relation to how they land this. And I suppose that's where the real conversation will be, is how much flexibility do regional councils have to make this workable? Because at this stage, the map clearly isn't.
Yeah, and so therefore, what are the opportunities to be able to challenge this so-called map that was devised in Wellington?
At this stage, the map is the regulation, so there's no opportunity to challenge it. But regional councils have timeframes where they can put rules that are potentially more strict in their regional plans. But when they're putting a rule in their regional plan, it could be more tailored to the catchment. So a quick example, Hawke's Bay Regional Council's just got a plan that they've notified. They're applying 15 degrees slope on a paddock basis. So while the slope's more stringent, the workability is more pragmatic for farmers because it's based on the paddock or on that land rather than a national map.
We were talking there in the introduction around the word pugging. For those who don't know, is where the heavy weight of animals and causing inflictions on the soil structure. What are some of those rules for people who haven't read it?
That's a really tricky one. So there's new rules around grazing animals on a winter forage crop. and essentially says that you have to meet these standards if you want to be permitted in relation to doing that. One of those standards is that you can't have a pug mark of more than 20 centimetres in depth or pugging for more than 50% of the paddock. Obviously, something that's going to be extremely challenging for farmers to meet, and the real issue with that is that farmers have to somehow future cast to be able to guess whether or not they're going to meet that standard when they start to graze their animals. So it's likely that when we reviewed all the rules, especially the winter grazing, we thought most farmers will probably need a resource consent. And again, that's going to be challenging for regional councils to be able to implement the number of consents over a short amount of time and the requirements on farmers.
There is a real worry around the high country, and
they're going to actually capture yard weaning of animals. So it will probably capture a lot more activities than what was originally intended. So if you've got animals that are 4 months or older and they're greater than 120 kgs, then these new rules apply to you.
And what about this nitrogen cap as well? 190 kilos of synthetic nitrogen applied per hectare and, of course, audited annually. What does that mean for most dairy farmers or sheep and beef farmers?
For most sheep and beef farmers, they should be well below that. It's only on the pasture, so it doesn't cover things like arable or horticulture. But what we understand is that it's going to be challenging for some of those dairy farmers, for example, that are maybe irrigated dairy farms in Canterbury on those gravel soils. There'll be a requirement for them to meet that over time.
And this is on land over 10 hectares. So what about lifestyle blocks? Should they be concerned?
I think most lifestyle blocks, well, it depends depending on their size, some will be captured. And I think it's probably appropriate for everybody to understand what these new rules mean. Don't just assume that you'll be exempted from them because they've got quite a low bar. So all farmers and all lifestyle owners should take a good look and understand what they mean for them. The rules are a little bit different, so it's not one size fits all. They're slightly tailored to different farm systems, for example, and land uses.
And of course, we have an election coming up. Are these rules enforceable regardless of a change in government?
Yes, until a new government decides to maybe change them. So these rules essentially have immediate effect pretty much. Some have a bit of a stage before they bite. For example, stock exclusion kicks in 2023 unless you're a new land use, and then it applies immediately. But essentially the new rules have immediate effect, but sometimes the bite is a little bit into the future. It'll be really interesting to see what regional councils do in this space, obviously, because they're going to go through a regional plan process where they're going to have to put in new rules. So they'll be able to look at these rules, determine what they're putting in their plans and work out what works for their communities.
So there's the national policy statement that's implemented by regional councils over a 3 to 5 year period, but the stock exclusion is 2023 and the environmental standards immediately in September. Who's going to audit these certified freshwater plans?
Yes, another area of great concern, whether or not we've got the expertise in the country to be able to roll out, one, all these consents, and then two, essentially these certified freshwater farm plans as well. And there's a big question mark there. We know that we really need to build our soil conservation understanding in New Zealand in particular, and special expertise around more complex farm systems such as the sheep and beef systems. So this is a really challenging space. And I think a lot of farmers and a lot of communities are really worried about the implications of these new rules on them, the workability, the practicality, and the rollout of them. And I know regional councils are really engaged in working out how to make this work for everyone as well.
Corina, beef and lamb have always there to offer great advice to farmers, but struggling to wrap your head around it as it's a moving feast. What are you working on in the background to be able to walk beside farmers to best understand what they need to do so they don't get penalised?
I think what everyone needs now is certainty. So we're working with regional councils to work out how they're going to implement the rules, well, how they interpret them firstly, and then secondly, how they're going to implement them. We're hoping to partner through working with farmers so that we can provide clarity and certainty to them about what's going to be required. And if resource consent is required, to actually enable them or empower them to go through that consenting pathway to reduce costs and also, ensure an even playing field for everybody. So there's a lot of people working on this at the moment, but the real need is to empower people rather than disempowering or disincentivizing them.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Corina Jordan is the Environmental Strategy Manager for Beef and Lamb, and that was following a very informative webinar that was this afternoon, taking a lot of questions around what we do know already around the RMA regulation amendments, the new National Environmental Standards for Freshwater Management, and the National Policy Statement that are all coming into effect at different times. So, of course, head to Beef and Lamb, of course, Dairy NZ for all of the information as it unfolds. It's an interesting time. There was a lot of people at 17,000 submissions, I believe the biggest turnout of farmer submissions in history. So everybody's voices were at the table. Were they all heard? That's another question. I have some questions of my own of what was going on behind closed doors, and hopefully over coming days on Sarah's Country we'll get to the bottom a little bit around that farm leadership and government decision making. Now, coming up after the break, we're going to be joined by Conrad Wilkshire. Now, Conrad is with Property Brokers as the General Manager for Rural. Now, rural real estate has done really well in the last 12 months, up 15%. Of course, not dramatically affected by COVID. We're going to find out after the break what is driving rural real estate sales with Conrad from Property Brokers.
This is Sarah's Country.
Now, if you'd like something to be happy about, farm sales in the last 3 months leading into July 2020 are up 15%. And joining us now to work through the REANZ stats as well as what's driving them and some things around those headwinds of environmental challenges is General Manager from Property Brokers, Conrad Wilkshire. Good evening, Conrad. Thank you so much for joining Sarah's Country tonight.
Thanks, Sarah. No, great to be alongside the show. It's been follow it and good to be part of it.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Conrad, this is fantastic news. The median prices haven't altered either.
No, look, a couple of things make this last 3 months interesting, particularly, that June-July period, is that we knew the autumn was going to be tricky because of the lockdown. And in fact, you couldn't get on properties over April, and lockdown only really mid-May. We were able to get out and about to what was a very kind of new business as usual. So, the autumn market's worth about at least a third of the annual sales. So to be locked out of that was very challenging for the industry because we knew there was a lot of farm activity, a lot of people wanting to take options for the next season. But, look, fortunately, you can't stop a market, and I think there's one big signal in this. And, there were 341 farms sold using the latest REANZ data to the end of July, and that's up 30% on the same time the year before. And as you say, the value's held across the board at around about that 23,000 hectare. So, that's a pretty solid effort from the market point of view. And what I'd also say is that the lifestyle market similarly is even stronger. And maybe it's because people felt through the lockdown period that they just wanted to get out and get off the small section, but it's been unprecedented. There's 1,240 sales for the 3 months to July. And to give that a context, almost 2/3 of them happened oops, I fell off the grip there, my temporary stand. There's actually been 2/3 of those were in July. And incredibly, that's about 463% on the period, same period for May. So when you have a look at all that and you put it all together, it's quite a solid story around the fact that the market, we don't expect the market to carry on at that level. What there was a lot of pent-up demand and genuine on the part of businesses, farm businesses to go forward. And also maybe there was a bit of a COVID effect with the lifestyle market. But certainly you'd have to say they are very solid numbers. And obviously there's some regulatory impact there, I think, in the lifestyle market where first home buyers had more options. That had a good run with their KiwiSaver recovery. That had 5 years of solid gains with KiwiSaver. Regulatory hurdles were dropped to get in, and those that already bought were able to maybe move into the lifestyle market. So, you round it all out, it's a pretty solid story.
You certainly noticed it around Canterbury, and it's such a massive lifestyle market here, as you know. But there was a lot of expat Kiwis money coming back and a lot of sight unseen in the lifestyle market. Of course, wouldn't you want to get out of London and to come to somewhere like beautiful like the Banks Peninsula, Conrad? But in the farm side of it, what has been locked out is foreign capital. So what is driving this?
Well, I think, the farm market, if you look at the farm market, there are several markets within markets. And so you spoke about foreign capital. That, I suppose you have to look at the market in two, if you look at the dairy market particularly, the foreign capital had a big influence in that, particularly 2013, 14 onwards through to about 2017 when the rules changed. But if you have a look at the dairy market below $5 million, a lot of those are still going to owner-operators, much as they've always done. And so that market is operating as normal. But if I was to give you the Canterbury market, you go back 13, 14, about $466 odd million worth of sales. Canterbury this last 12 months in Canterbury was $21.5 million of sales. So, you've gone from almost $500 million to what may have been one farm under those previous times. So it really has changed quite a lot, and I think people are sort of reacting to that. So you've got a game of two halves. You've got that large end of the market where it's moving much more to return. I think you'll have Andrew comment on that later on the show. And that is, to give a bit of background to that, there's only 6 dairy farms above 10 million sold last year. So whereas actually, if you take the Waikato, there were over 50 farms sold. But again, they typically are those owner-operator holdings rather than the sort of larger scale properties.
How many of them were under contract and didn't sell because the due diligence was just too hard in such uncertain times?
Yeah, due diligence is a real factor. And it's on a whole range of fronts. What we now are working through, and we had a really good presentation from Charlotte Glass the other day, and what we really need to do is build more time into our due diligence planning. In other words, the sale process that we often get involved with can take a matter of, it can be a 6 to 8 week sale program. Typically can be easily 6 weeks through a tender. If you have a look at due diligence, though, you can be, particularly if consents are not fully understood or the paperwork's not up to date, farm environment plan not completed, that can be months. So it really pays to get on top of those processes early. And what we're seeing on the part of buyers, though, is a very expensive undertaking. And so they're going to be more and more careful about going into a negotiation. And if the information is not to hand and it's not prepared well, they'll probably likely, with the market and the choice they have, probably go to another option, another property that has some of that paperwork organised. So we're really working hard with industry to make sure we're up to date, but importantly, encouraging our farmer clients to partner their advisors and actually get the support they need to actually frame it all up for the season.
Conrad, you say to hand. We live in an environment of covering your ass and passing the buck, to be fair. So how much can a vendor, a potential vendor going on to put it on the market, actually do? Because at the end of the day, where does that liability and legality lie on that transaction? Because I know, property brokers can only do so much as an agency in between.
Yeah, look, and ultimately everybody has to, there is accountability on part of everybody. We can only do with what's known and ask for all the information that's available to be made available. Equally, a purchaser can go in good faith into a process and then maybe have a decision held up with an irrigation scheme and actually understanding the consenting levels there. There's just a whole raft. So I think ultimately it does come down to the buyers doing their own due diligence and getting their own advice. And I think that's maybe the disconnect sometimes. It's because the buyers are having to, where things are less certain, you just can't know for certain where. And if you look at your previous speaker, they're trying to understand where things are and where they're not.
Yeah,
it's not straightforward.
Well,
the only way to through that is you sometimes discount based on the fact that you haven't got perfect knowledge, and if things go south, what's my fallback position?
Sorry to interrupt. I was actually just laughing there because you're absolutely right. When your regional council doesn't even know how it's going to be implemented, it makes it blooming hard to sign off and go unconditional on a large farm deal with so much uncertainty. Certainly feel for everybody that's involved in that process. And as you mentioned, Charlotte Glass, what an outstanding leader and expert in that field, and down here in Canterbury as well. To close, while I've got you, Conrad, our next guest is part of a sponsored series by Farmstrong, something I know you know very deeply well. We're talking tonight, and I need to give a bit of a stir up to those watching who are not participating. We've got this wonderful children's book to give away called Use Your Voice. All you need to do in the comments below is simply let us know how you take some time out for yourself and your family. You could just write horse riding or walking in the hills or biking. Just one word. I need to give this book away tonight, so get in those comments. So my last question to you, Conrad, what do you like to do with your family to sort of, clear the cobwebs out of the head?
Well, Taupo is one of my favourite spots in the world, and my son had been on at me to teach him to fly fish, and there was a bit of challenge coming back from him because he knew it's about 20 years since I last had the rod out properly, and he was sort of doubting my capacity to impart the knowledge. But I have to say I have it on video within half an hour of some superb coaching on the Tongariro River. He was out there double casting and I wouldn't say quite getting to the other side of the bank, but it wasn't a bad effort. And while we didn't catch anything, we did get out in the boat and we caught a 6.5 pound trout later that afternoon. So as no better place in the world to clear your head than on the Tongariro River, or if that doesn't work, get out in the boat and get back to some good old-fashioned trolling.
Awesome. Conrad, I can hear some advice coming through. Any sons that are watching out there getting taught by their dad to fly fish, they need to listen to their old man, right?
Absolutely. Couldn't go wrong.
Thank you so much, Conrad Wilkshire, joining us there, General Manager from Property Brokers for the Rural Division. What a fantastic family-owned company and, of course, great results there in terms of farm sales, up 15%. And as I said, joining us after the break in a Farmstrong series, part of a Farmers Weekly, is Harriet Bremner, children's author of her latest book, Use Your Voice. We'll be joined by Harriet very shortly after the break. This is Sarah's Country.
One of the first things you learn when you live out
here
here
for that, Conrad.
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
Like electric fencing.
Or horse feed.
Or bee suits.
Children's.
Chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help your farm,
Grow.
Milk. Dredge.
Rhea, come on in.
Because we're out here too.
The recipe for perfect beef and lamb. Take one small fresh country. Make sure it's nice and remote. at the ideal temperature all year round. Next, mix in the farmers. They go perfectly with the nature of this unique place. Add regular sprinkles of rain to really bring out the lush meadow grass. Then let your animals happily graze on this grass, all day, every day. And there you have it, New Zealand, the perfect recipe for beef and lamb. Taste pure nature.
Oh, I love it when I give you guys a poke. You always respond very well in terms of comments. What we're discussing tonight is what is those simple things that you do for your mental health and your families. Great to see Lockie Taylor's watching. Lots of love to you, Ellie, and the family, Lockie. Lockie takes off to the Marlborough Sounds, which is not very far away. Of course, what an awesome part of the world. My mum chose to live there because it's so good for her mental health. Kate Taylor goes walking every day to get some air between her ears. Another favourite, sitting down with a friend with a cuppa or a glass of wine to chew the fat. Couldn't agree more, Kate. And Veronica is very much into fishing as well. Something I'm learning a little bit about at the moment, Veronica, and I can tell you what, it does seem very relaxing, that's for sure. That's if it's going to plan. Now, of course, we're joined now as we continue to discuss around the topic of mental health and resilience with the new book out called Use Your Voice. Harriet Bremner joins us now. Welcome back to the show, Harriet. This is exciting. You've got a lot of pent-up children's books in you, and but this one's very, very special.
Yeah, hi Sarah. Thanks for having me again. This one is super special because it came from a place of my own battle with some mental health and well-being stuff myself. So when I actually wrote the book, I was, struggling with some things, and it really helped me. And this is why I've written the book, so that I'm targeting children, but also the adults that are reading the story with the children as well.
Yeah, and so it's such a special. For those who didn't catch our introduction, tell us a little bit more about the story of Jess the Black Huntaway and how her gorgeous friend Pops comes along to let her out of her mental trap, which you've used as a kennel, and get back to what she loves.
Yeah, so the power of this story, Use Your Voice here, there's Jess and Poppy on the front there with the beautiful Mount Cook in the background, is that we want to increase awareness of social inclusion and decrease the discrimination against mental health and well-being that we do have in this country. And, the whole point that it is okay to be not okay. And so I took myself off to 2 of the Will to Live evenings, actually, to see Ellie and you guys there and everybody speaking, and was completely blown away. And well, by the strength and courage and resilience of people actually sharing their stories. And the most resilient thing that I ever did was to stand up and say that I wasn't okay anymore. And up until that point, I'd always thought that resilience was walking out the door, putting a smile on your face and being okay. But I've really realised that it's not. And growing up in a culture where we tend to bottle things up, and they, as Poppy tells Jess in the story, they fester and stew, which in the end isn't very good for anyone involved. So Poppy's teaching Jess, the Black Huntaway in the story, some self-help strategies for keeping her mental health and well-being on track. And so then it's teaching our children through the powerful form of storytelling how important it is to learn how to look after ourselves, surround yourselves with a really good tribe of people that are very supportive, that you can trust with these things that you want to talk about, or sometimes don't want to talk about but need to. And, so that moving forward, as our children grow into young adults, and for example, You might have a young 18-year-old going to their first shepherding job and they're up a very isolated gully. Well, how cool is it to think that they've learnt some strategies growing up of how to deal with their mental health when they hit a rough patch? You know, it could be that first step of going to talk to their boss about the fact that they're not feeling 100% at the moment. So if we can create these strategies for our children to learn and change the behaviour, which then in turn changes our culture over time, then I think that would be fantastic.
Congratulations. It's an absolutely beautiful book, as is the first one, Think Safe. And of course, while I have you here, I do want to touch on a point that gravely concerns me, and I know that you work for Safer Farms as an organisation, and your passion for health and safety on farm and improving that, because we certainly need to. There's really trying times at the moment, Harriet, with a labour shortage in the agricultural contractors, and I know sadly your former partner James passed away in an accident on farm. What were the key messages that you'd like to get out there to those who have become complacent, are fatigued, to take their time to use that Think Safe brain?
Yeah, look, so we've really been forced into believing that health and safety is something that we tick on a box on a piece of paper and we chuck it in the filing cabinet because that's our health and safety done and dusted, and it was an extra thing that we did on a rainy day. And I'm really working really hard to make people aware that actually health, safety and wellbeing is something that's threaded into everything that we do every day. It's not an extra thing. It shouldn't be extra work, because why do we not want to go home alive or uninjured at the end of every workday? That's what everybody should want. So it just baffles me that we still see the eye rolling and the sighs and the begrudging, not interested in talking about it, when we're talking about people here. And we know that people are the most important part of our farming operations. Without the people, we don't have an operation that can work. And the thing that worries me the most about the shortages with staff and things is that I think the first thing that's going to drop off somebody's routine is the exercise, their hobby, their time with their family on a Sunday afternoon, which are all things that are really, really good for us to recharge so that actually we can then work in a more productive way. But if these things are dropping off when we most need them, because usually when you don't feel like exercising, that's when you most need to do it, and it makes you feel so much better afterwards. This is concerning because people are then going to be working longer hours. They're going to get tired, possibly not eating and sleeping as well. Sleep falls off the wagon because we're starting to worry about how am I actually going to fit in everything I've got to do tomorrow because I don't have help. So it would be really great to think that people are able to actually ask for help, from their family, from friends, from neighbours, jump on across the fence and help the person next to you, and then they can come and help you as well. And before you do a job, stop and think about it. It's really simple. Just stop and think, do I need to do this right now, or can this wait till tomorrow? So prioritising and things like that. So it's just weaving it into every day and just making practical decisions to keep ourselves safe.
And of course, we're talking to Harriet Bremner. She's a children's author of the latest book, Use Your Voice. Harriet, how's it been received across the schools that you've been recently visiting as well?
Yeah, so we've just started going into some rural schools and spending some time with the children. The children, of course, love meeting a real-life sausage dog, which is pretty cool. But, the thing that blows me away is the enthusiasm that the children have for talking about these things. And, children are at that moldable stage in their lives where they're like sponges. They want to learn new things, but they also haven't been affected by the expectations of society or what society puts, the stigmas attached to things. So you talk about looking after themselves on the farm when they're out and about with mum and dad and things, and they'll tell you about not walking under the forks of the tractor if they're up, always put them on the ground because X, Y, and Z. They can tell you that exercise is important, and they actually really want to learn how to look after themselves, how to look after their friends, and also, they want mum and dad to come home safe and sound at the end of every day as well. So if we can change these behaviours and get our children understanding that it's so important that it's just a part of everyday business, then they are our future farmers, they're our future contractors, they're the future in ag, and then, you know, they will be teenagers and adults that know that it is a super important part of everyday farming.
I know there'll be a burning question out there from our audience. How do we get our hands on a copy of Use Your Voice?
So if you go to www.gurtandpops.com, then you can order straight off me online. And I know that ag companies quite like to buy in bulk sometimes to hand out to their staff. So I do have a wholesale option as well for people that do big orders. So we basically we want to get the message spread as far and wide as possible, because mental health and wellbeing is something that inevitably we're all going to come across in our lives at some stage, for whatever reason that might be. So it's something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the good, clear message in the story is how to help others. And that's something that we're all grappling with on how to do as well. And of course, Use Your Voice does that so well. Thank you, Harriet, for everything that you do for this industry. It was an absolute pleasure to have you tonight on Sarah's Country. Of course, Harriet Bremner, Use Your Voice. And loving the fact we've got some more comments coming through. I have to agree with Dean. It's very good for your mental health shooting rabbits. And Briar Property, Brett, sorry, my apologies, cutting firewood with my family. Sounds weird, but it's good exercise and love the company as we work through. Yeah, absolutely. It's very good physical work, but rewarding at the end when it's all stacked at the end of the day. And Anthony has said, love catching up with friends and family in the local community at the local footy club during winter. Social isolation is something that we all suffer from in lots of different ways. And as I said there earlier, it doesn't matter if you're in the mountains or in the middle of Queen Street. It's the social interaction that is very, very important. Now, coming up to close, we're joined by NZAB's director, Andrew Lamming, who's going to be talking about how things aren't dismal in regards to dairy debt. And I look forward to finding out more around some new changes to the Reserve Bank's lending to push funds more directly into the economy and what a negative OCR may look like. This is Sarah's Country. Well, there is broad brush statements that the dairy industry is debt-laden and over-leveraged, but our next guest, a Timaru-based director of NZAB Rural Banking, Andrew Lamming, has delved into the financial statistics and believes it shows a different picture. And Andrew joins us now. Evening, Andrew.
How are you going, Sarah?
Good. Now, we know our dairy farmers are not only passionate and hard-working, but they have been focusing hard on laying down that strong cash flow onto their balance sheets. What did you find out as you looked into how things are going in repaying debt in dairy?
Yeah, well, I suppose just going back a couple of steps, Sarah. I mean, we work in the industry every day, work across farmers where they borrow $1 million or over $100 million. And I suppose what we've been seeing over the last few years is the ongoing theme of dairy being over leveraged, which has actually been correct in some quarters, but over the entire industry we were a little bit more sceptical about whether or not that was true. And I suppose what we were really concerned about was the impact on farmers' confidence and also those that were seeking to invest into the sector as well. So what we did, we dived into the Reserve Bank data and the Dairy NZ data to look at the industry as a whole, and probably found that when you look right across the industry, it was probably not as leveraged as maybe what the commentary would suggest.
And so just looking here, there's some fantastic graphs in the last week's Farmers Weekly and, of course, online farmersweekly.co.nz. Is low interest rates really contributing to a lot of this?
Yeah, in part. The first trend probably to look at is just the fact that farmers have repaid a lot of debt. Over $1.5 billion in the dairy sector in the last 12 months alone. Now that's a tremendous amount of money when you're actually used to the fact that debt in the agri sector is going up 5 to 10% every year. Even more so when you look at, say, the home loan sector or the commercial business sector, where in the home loan sector over the last year, they've gone up between $15 to $20 billion. So farmers are using this great profitability at the moment to repay down debt like never before. It's really neat to see. So that's the first thing we looked at, I suppose, when examining that, is just overall sector debt coming down.
And with regards to yields, there must be some great interest in potentially buying into dairy again from an investment perspective.
Yeah, that's another thing we examined, and it's not really a measure of leverage, but I suppose it was worthwhile looking at how these farms are performing relative to their asset value. So we did just a very simple analysis against government bonds, which are generally regarded as relatively risk-free. Now, you'd never expect them to track exactly the same way, but the gap between them has got quite different. And what we're seeing now amongst dairy farms with long-run average payouts is they're actually yielding between 6 to 8%. And which is actually not significantly higher than long-term averages, but it is in the context of government bonds or interest rates or alternative investments now being in the low single digits.
And in regards to production of kilo of milk solids annually, it's great to see that production has remained the same and debt has come down considerably.
Yeah, and so by default, then debt per kilo has come down. And I suppose with payout still tracking at that long-run average and actually increasing a wee bit over time. We're now sitting around about sort of $6.30, $6.40. And also with low interest rates now for the last sort of 3 to 4 years and tracking lower, interest coverage, or the amount that a farmer actually pays in interest relative to his overall profit, has gone down. And I suppose that's a key measure to actually see whether or not a business is leveraged or over-leveraged or under-leveraged.
Well, it's interesting too because, we've got some very risk-adverse banks in New Zealand in the agri sector and environmental regulations and uncertainty is certainly driving that. But you're saying that the yields are there for those who can get over that hurdle.
Yeah, the yields are there, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not justified. There are a number of headwinds in the sector, the environmental uncertainty, even asset value uncertainty at the moment as well. But I suppose what we're seeing is that gap or that level of performance, which is contributing to those high yields, almost feel like those that it's getting too far away from some of those lower risk-free returns that you see or compare against. So there's a lot of good happening in the sector at the moment, and I suppose when I step back and think about confidence waning a bit, they've had a few headwinds with environmental, but the amount of profit, our farmers at the moment have been through, just finished their entire FY20 financial results, and we're seeing some of the best ever results in the industry. It's really quite exciting.
Fantastic. Great to hear. Now, while I've got you here, let's talk about OCR. Now, a lot of the banks say, don't think we're going to pay you to take out loans. Negative interest rates being passed on may not be one tool of Adrian Orr's, but how do they pump that cash directly into the economy?
Yeah, well, it's got a lot more complicated than it used to be. I mean, go back 10 to 15 years, changes in OCR actually meant a heck of a lot when it came to borrowing costs, and they still have an impact. But the reality is, too, is that most banks actually get their funding locally or offshore, so the cost of their deposits actually determine what the borrowing rate is. Now, the cost of deposits actually do go down in line with the OCR, or generally do. So I suppose what happens is when the OCR goes down, it's supposed to go possibly further. There's a couple of banks right now talking negative 0.5. ASB and ANZ came out this week and said that. So it's whether or not the deposit book will actually follow down to levels like that. In saying that, there's actually a new policy which has been mooted by the Reserve Bank called Funding for Lending. And what they're attempting to do is make sure that the OCR, or funding at the OCR level, more directly comes across by way of the actual cost of funding to the banks and therefore to the retail customer. So what you might see, for example, is an OCR of minus 0.5%. and actually banks being able to access funding at that level too, because effectively the Reserve Bank is actually generating money for the banks at this level. Now, this is only very, very new and only being talked about at the Reserve Bank in the initial stages. And also, it's worth noting that it may not be for agri or business, it may be more for the retail sector. But nevertheless, anything that brings down the cost of funding across the entire banking industry will be good for borrowers.
Do you believe we may see a swing in more New Zealand investment into our farms?
Oh, look, I actually hope so. I mean, you actually think about investment. You've got a number of different sectors to invest into, and all of a sudden you've got one which is almost appearing like an outlier. You know, dairy farming and even all types of farming are returning very well versus commercial properties or equities, or the dividend component of equities anyway. So I think it will definitely become more attractive. I think where it becomes a bit more complicated is actually accessing that investment. You know, like you can go and buy a residential house, you can buy a share relatively easily. Buying a dairy farm is obviously a bigger chunk of money, and finding someone to manage it is difficult too. But in saying that, the market generally solves these things. We've had equity partnerships in the past. We're having more and more leasebacks these days, and so it'll be different ideas that come to the market, I suppose, to capitalise on an ever increasing yield. Or an investment play in the sector.
And it certainly may help a lot, as you said, equity partnerships, because it needs to stack up better on paper when it comes to those types of more complex agreements for the cash-strapped young fella or girl getting into these farms as well. So that's quite exciting to see that the tables have turned. Yes. Andrew, what would you say, sort of predicting in the next 6 to 12 months around where things could go and banks' appetite for lending?
Oh, look, it's. I'd like to think appetite would get better, but I think we're still in a period of banks looking for repayments. Despite what I said before about leverage in the sector being not as bad as what people thought or think, there are still plenty of farms and farmers that are, just like every other industry. There are still some other headwinds too, like the Reserve Bank capital ratios, which mean that lending to the sector is not as profitable as other sectors like home lending. So those things aren't going to fix themselves overnight. Now, in saying that, there is still a very active market by way of banking out there. Not all banks are participating in terms of actually new-to-bank customers or supporting additional growth, but that does by no stretch mean that no banks are. And they are still looking to support very good operators who can do it with a good track record, who've got good systems going forward as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Andrew Lambing is a director at NZAB, Rural Banking Service, and of course some fantastic financial commentary there. Dairy not dismal is the article in Farmers Weekly. Interesting word of headwinds and much discussed tonight on Sarah's Country. There is a lot of headwinds in lots of directions, but every way I look, primary sector seems to be showing not only resilience but success. We've seen a lot of strong annual results across our companies in the primary sector of late, and our commodity prices certainly are volatile, but there is a great appetite we're seeing in articles in Farmers Weekly around the demand for our antibiotic-free and these certified freshwater farm environment plans is really this license to supply in this new world. So New Zealand, we are positioned very, very well, and it's all about doing this together and coming through. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here tonight on Sarah's Country, wherever you've been watching or listening live. Make sure you send any feedback or any suggestions to sarah@periummedia.com. Anything on demand is on podcast. Simply search Sarah's Country for everything that you may have missed, and you can share with your friends and family. And of course, for all of those live comments coming through, I've really enjoyed your interaction tonight. It's been fantastic. Thank you to the great team at Farmers Weekly for producing an alliance with Sarah's Country, and we'll be back again tomorrow night live from 7 o'clock. Good night and go well. This is Sarah's Country.